Welcome back after the break. Now for stories in detail. We start from Iran, where the government has officially withdrawn for some commitments under a 2015 nuclear deal with Europe, China and Russia. Tehran took the step after its 60-day deadline to fulfill promises under the deal was rejected by the signatories. It would no longer abide by limited production of enriched uranium and heavy water as agreed in the deal. In a related development, Washington and London have differed over whether Iran poses a threat to U.S. troops in Iraq. The U.S. military has reaffirmed its concerns about possible danger to its forces. This comes after a senior British commander in the U.S.-led coalition said there is no imminent threat from Iran in the region. The U.S. military's Central Command issued a clarifying statement after the remarks of Major General Chris Ghika. The coalition's deputy commander, Ghika, was talking to reporters via teleconference at the Pentagon. CENTCOM spokesman Captain Bill Urban said Ghika's comments run counter to the credible threats available to intelligence. Despite mounting tensions, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said Tehran does not seek war with the U.S. Next, Pakistan has arrested Abdul Rahman Makki, leader of the banned organization Jamaat-ud-Dawa. Makki was taken into custody for hate speech and inciting violence. Makki has also criticized the government's crackdown on extremist networks in the country. He is a long-standing critic of Pakistan's implementation of Financial Action Task Force directives. Makki's arrest is a part of Pakistan's ongoing crackdown against radical groups. In Yemen, around 97 Houthi fighters have been killed by the government coalition. The coalition has launched airstrikes targeting Houthi militia in Al-Dal Governorate. It claimed to have captured another 120 Houthi fighters and destroyed weapons. The government has accused the Houthis of not abiding by the Stockholm Agreement. Earlier, Houthi rebels claimed responsibility for a series of drone attacks on Saudi oil installations. Meanwhile, the UN has announced that redeployment of Houthis from Red Sea ports has been carried out. It termed the step a diplomatic breakthrough after months of heightened tensions in the region. This followed negotiations between warring sides to solve a dispute over the distribution of Red Sea port revenues. The UN has urged parties to finalize negotiations for the full implementation of the next stages of the Hudaydah deal. The UN hopes this will pave the way for humanitarian aid for the country's civilian population.
During the last 4 days, we have had a very good cooperation with General Muski and his team and the commanders on the ground. We have had access to all parts of the ports, the containers, whatever we wanted to see.
In business news, China has reported surprisingly weaker growth in retail sales and industrial output for April. As China's trade war with the U.S. escalates, the data adds pressure on Beijing to roll out more economic stimulus.
China's economy has had a bumpy ride this year, and April was no different. The National Bureau of Statistics reported clothing sales fell for the first time since 2009. Overall, China's retail sales grew at the slowest pace since May 2003. Growth in industrial output also slowed dramatically in April, but Chinese officials said the data should not be viewed with alarm.
I think what's more important is to assess tendencies. In April, the entire industrial demand, including employment, prices, and expectancies and industrial output. And judging by all of these various targets and comprehensive changing tendencies, we maintained steady economic performance and a status of steady economic growth.
The latest data on China's economy pointed to a loss of momentum, but fears that worse might follow were eased by US President Donald Trump. In a series of tweets, he said a trade deal could soon be struck with China.
Meanwhile, in Sudan, the military and opposition alliance have agreed to a 3-year transition period leading to a civilian government. The military said civilians would have 2/3 of the seats on the 300-member Transitional Legislative Council. The rest of the seats would be taken by parties not a part of the protest alliance. Sudan has been ruled by the military council since last month's toppling of President Omar al-Bashir. Protests that led to his downfall have continued amid demands for a completely civilian government. Hours before the latest deal was announced, at least 5 protesters and a security officer died during clashes in Khartoum. Elsewhere, 4 more opposition lawmakers have been charged with treason by Venezuela's top court. So far, 14 legislators face treason charges for conspiring against President Nicolas Maduro. If convicted, the defendants could be sentenced to a maximum 30 years in prison. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has reported extrajudicial executions and arbitrary detentions by Maduro. It has urged the International Court of Justice to investigate the Venezuelan government for human rights abuses. Moving on, Russia has told the U.S. it wants to fully restore bilateral ties. U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi to discuss disagreements.
In the first high-level contact between Moscow and Washington since the Mueller report, U.S. Secretary of State visited Russia. Mike Pompeo earlier met with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. While both expressed a desire to improve relations, they remained divided over arms control, the Iran nuclear deal, and Venezuela. Pompeo's push for Russia to end its support for President Nicolas Maduro was flatly rejected by Moscow. He warned Russia against interfering in next year's U.S. presidential election. Lavrov said the meeting was a step in a positive direction.
I hope that the visit of Mike Pompeo will not only contribute to the improvement of the atmosphere of Russia-U.S. relations, but will also allow us to take small but real steps in resolving practical issues.
Mike Pompeo emphasized the importance of resolving issues for promoting bilateral relationship.
We had a frank discussion about many issues, including many places where we disagree. The United States stands ready to find common ground with Russia as long as the two of us can engage seriously on those issues.
Putin met with Pompeo after the news conference said he hoped to fully restore Moscow-Washington ties.
I hope that now we are creating necessary conditions for that, because Mr. Mueller's commission, although its work was rather exotic, still has to be credited with a largely objective investigation.
U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo also asked Russia to free a group of captured Ukrainian sailors.
For more on this, we are joined by our Moscow correspondent, Dan Ashby. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. A very wide range of international issues were discussed by President Putin and Secretary Pompeo. Did you sense a genuine bilateral effort to improve ties, or are the two governments still butting heads?
Osman, a bit of both, really. I think mostly these were baby steps towards trying to improve a relationship which has hit its lowest ebb in the last few years since the end of the Cold War. I mean, the US-Russian relationship has been on a downward trajectory since 2014. Of course, the Ukrainian conflict, that's brought US sanctions against Russia. The US was against Russia's annexation of Crimea. They are angry about alleged election meddling by Russia. So I think a corner was turned when the Mueller report came out, and it looks as if the US wants to start to put the relationship on more of a positive footing. They both talked about building trust and fighting prejudice. But look, on the big substantive issues, the crisis in Venezuela, Syria, the Iran nuclear deal, there was no movement from either side at all. They are diametrically opposed on most of those issues, but at least they're coming together to try to talk more.
Right. And to you, what stood out about the Pompeo visit?
I mean, this is the challenge for Russia, to be honest, because, of course, Russia wants to see the Iran nuclear deal survive, as does its European partners and China, of course. But the problem is that the rhetoric from the US is ratcheting up. You've seen Mike Pompeo go to Europe saying he needs to give information about credible threats from Iran, about escalating tensions. Then there was those stories of the US putting on standby 120,000 troops that it would send to the region in the event of some sort of conflict or provocation. And Lavrov came out and said, look, he hoped that was just a rumor, because what's needed right now is calming of tensions. Russia wants to see that nuclear deal survive to give some incentive to Iran to stay in the fold, if you like. But things look bad for the nuclear deal. As you say, Tehran has already announced it's going to begin enriching uranium, and Russia has very little power to persuade European companies and European partners to continue trading with Iran in the face of very powerful US sanctions. So I think tensions are rising in the region, and Russia is trying to calm things down. But remember, Russia is an Iranian ally, and that is perhaps something that the US feels uncomfortable about. So Russia has its own national interests at stake as well, because it trades with Iran. It sells, or is trying to sell, big weapons to Iran. So everyone has got their own national interests, and they're just trying to keep the situation calm.
And lastly, Pompeo warned Russia against interfering in the next US presidential election. Did the topic arise in official talks, or was he just playing to the media?
Yes, exactly. It seems to be a case of carrot and stick, doesn't it? On one hand, you had Mike Pompeo coming out and talking about a new relationship and trying to put things on a better trajectory. But yes, then he came out and he warned Russia about meddling in the next election, and had a very strong statement saying that the US believes that Russia meddled in the last election and would take a strong stance against it if it tried to do it again. But the interesting thing here is that Mike Pompeo said that they had offered Russia a load of actions that Russia could take to demonstrate that election meddling was something in the past, and if Russia did that, then that might allow them to turn a corner. So that is perhaps the US offering Russia a sort of avenue that they could go down to move things on. But on the big issues, as I said at the start, they are still very much opposed, and they're just trying to find smaller areas, things like well, they already have space cooperation, for instance, but they're now talking about arms control. These sorts of areas where if they can get some sort of agreement, they can at least show the rest of the world that they can still work together in some areas.
Thank you for your time. That was our correspondent Dan Ashby joining us from Moscow. Moving on, in Britain, Prime Minister Theresa May is set to bring the Brexit withdrawal agreement bill to Parliament. The bill will be put to vote on June the 3rd. May's spokesperson said a vote on the bill was imperative if the UK was to leave the EU before MP's summer recess. The Labour Party has hinted at not backing the bill without a cross-party deal, whereas Brexit-supporting Unionist Party, the DUP, has also declared it will vote against the bill. Conservative politicians showed concern that the deal would leave Britain following EU laws. May's EU divorce deal has been rejected 3 times by Parliament without agreement on an alternative. In another development, Facebook has tightened its live streaming rules to curb the sharing of graphic video, as happened after the Christchurch shooting. The announcement comes ahead of today's meeting of world leaders aimed at curbing online violence. Facebook said it is introducing a one-strike policy for the use of the live feature. The company said first-time offenders will be suspended from using live for a set period of time. It is also broadening the range of offences that qualify for one-strike suspensions. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is co-chairing a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. In the gathering, world leaders and tech company chiefs would sign the Christchurch Call. The call is a pledge to eliminate violent extremist content online. Moving on with our next story, Colombian high courts have denounced U.S. pressure aimed at influencing their decisions. The Constitutional Court, Council of State, and the Special Jurisdiction for Peace jointly rejected the U.S. attack on judicial integrity. The declaration comes after the U.S. revoked the visas of a Supreme Court justice and 2 Constitutional Court judges. The magistrates were handling extradition cases and the peace agreement with the rebel group FARC. The United States has said that its trade talks with China have not collapsed. Speaking to reporters at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump said negotiators from both sides were having a good dialogue. President Trump's comment follows the U.S. listing of more Chinese goods worth $300 billion for tariff hikes. The list of over 3,800 product categories is in line with President Trump's threat to extend duties to all Chinese imports. This comes after China decided to impose tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. goods from June the 1st. President Trump also said the U.S. will make a deal with China when the time is right. Moving on, Saudi Arabia says 2 oil pumping stations near Riyadh have been hit by explosive-laden drones. Energy Minister Khalid Al-Falih called the drone strikes a terrorist attack on global oil supplies. He said the attack caused minor damage at a pumping station but did not disrupt oil production or exports. The state-run oil company Aramco said it has temporarily shut down the east-west pipeline to evaluate its condition. It said no injuries were reported in the attacks. Yemen's Houthi rebels claimed responsibility, saying they launched 7 drone strikes on Saudi installations. The attack came 2 days after 2 Saudi oil tankers were among those hit off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Railway police in India's eastern Guwahati city have arrested 5 Rohingya refugees. Police said the refugees failed to produce their identity papers. The Rohingyas said they were on their way to a UN office in New Delhi to obtain refugee status certificates. More than 700 Rohingya have set up camps in Bangladesh and India after fleeing persecution in Myanmar 2 years ago. Police in the German town of Passau are on the hunt for a mass murderer armed with a crossbow. Investigators suspect the killer is involved in the deaths of 5 people.
German police have discovered 5 people shot dead with crossbow bolts. The first 3 were found in a rural Passau hotel on Saturday.
It was so that on Friday evening at around 10, 3 people checked into the guest house here in Passau. They came from the direction of Austria. On Saturday, the cleaning lady found the dead bodies of the 3 people at around noon.
2 more were discovered in a Lower Saxony flat, 650 kilometers away on Monday. What makes the case peculiar is that none of the bodies showed any signs of defensive action.
We have received preliminary autopsy results from the Munich Institute. In the autopsy, there were no signs of a fight or defensive actions on the corpses of the 3 victims.
A woman found in the guest house and another discovered in the flat were life partners. For now, the investigation remains ongoing.
WhatsApp has urged all users to update the app at the earliest because of a security bug. Amnesty International said the cyber attack left millions of users vulnerable, including rights defenders.
Facebook's WhatsApp is used by 1.5 billion people around the globe. On Tuesday, it emerged the messaging app had been breached by sophisticated spyware. The bug has been traced back to the NSO Group, an Israeli technology firm. All users have been urged to update the app as soon as possible.
The reports on NSO alleged exploit of a security breach on WhatsApp have not been verified yet by Amnesty International. But if true, they fully exemplify our claim to the Israeli court that the Ministry of Defense must revoke the export license of NSO Group.
NSO Group is best known for its mobile surveillance tools. The group has been accused of using spyware to target human rights defenders and lawyers.
So these softwares that NSO is marketing as tools to prevent terror and crime are used against human rights defenders and lawyers and doctors and members of parliament. We are not criminals and we are not terrorists.
WhatsApp was not able to confirm how many devices have been infected with spyware. This is the latest in the string of privacy-related scandals to hit the Facebook group.
The World Health Organization has issued its first ever guidelines regarding the prevention and management of dementia. The WHO report is entitled Risk Reduction of Cognitive Decline and Dementia.
Dementia affects 47 million people worldwide, and this number will triple by 2050. The World Health Organization has put forward a set of recommendations to prevent cognitive decline. While advising against smoking, the World Health Organization has suggested physical activity to dementia patients.
In order to reduce the risk of dementia is increasing physical activity, stopping tobacco use, reducing the use of alcohol intake, getting treatment for hypertension, diabetes, and increased cholesterol levels. And all these can go on to potentially reducing people's risk of dementia.
A WHO says the dementia is not a natural or inevitable consequence of aging, but the disease can be linked with pollution and poor sleep.
The main reason for this increase that we see in the prevalence of dementia is that populations are aging. We see that there are many more older people. And like I said, age, we know, is the one thing that is associated with dementia. And that's the main reason why we see this increasing prevalence.
According to WHO, nearly 10 million new dementia cases annually. At this rate, the cost of caring for dementia patients is expected to hit $2 trillion by 2030.
Representatives from 35 countries met at the 10th Petersburg Climate Dialogue in Berlin. The event was co-hosted by Germany and Chile with the theme Fulfilling the Promise of Paris.
The Petersburg Climate Dialogue is an informal meeting focused on the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. This summit takes place a day after Hawaii Observatory revealed carbon levels in the atmosphere are at the highest in 800,000 years. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that Earth could face total collapse if current emission trends are not reversed. Against the backdrop, Chancellor Angela Merkel vowed to make Germany carbon neutral by 2050.
I just told the Minister of the Environment that the Climate Cabinet discusses how to reach the goal of being climate neutral by 2050. And the discussion will not be on whether we achieve the goal, but how we achieve it.
The announcement comes at a time of increasing concern about the lack of action to tackle climate change.
Children and young people that are going on school strikes for climate protection every Friday create pressure. They create pressure on politicians all over the world. Honestly, that's not comfortable. But I must also most definitely say it is understandable.
Merkel acknowledged the importance of increasing climate protests by young people. The move was welcomed by Greenpeace climate policy advisor Sebastian Meng.
Buddhists around the world have been celebrating Vesak Day. Thousands of devotees have gathered in Vietnam's northern Ha Nam province for the occasion. Over 1,650 international delegates from 100 countries are commemorating the life of Gautam Buddha.
Appearing as if the night sky has fallen to the lake, these candles are part of a candlelit visual. This is just one way in which Buddhists commemorate Gautama Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and finally his passing into nirvana. Holy scriptures say each of these occurred on a full moon in the lunar month of Vesak. For believers, it's a day of joy, peace, and reflection.
I'm very happy to join this candlelight vigil. The scene is very beautiful with lots of candles on the lake.
On Vesak Day, Buddhists reaffirm their commitment to living a moral and compassionate lifestyle. Many of them believe performing good deeds on this particular day will bring blessings.
When putting the candlelight on the lake, I wish for my family to be at peace, as well as success for myself, and that the world will better develop.
The Vesak festival is also celebrated by Buddhists in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and in Southeast Asia.
Now bringing you stories from the world of sports. Italy's Matteo Berrettini has advanced to the third round of the Italian Open after beating Germany's Alexander Zverev in straight sets. Meanwhile, Australia's Nick Kyrgios beat Daniil Medvedev of Russia in the tournament's opening round.
We now know the results of Day 3 of Italian Open taking place in Rome. Playing at Foro Italico, Italy's Matteo Berrettini stunned world number 5 Alexander Zverev in the second round. The 33rd ranked wildcard entry blasted his way to the victory by 7-5 and 7-5. The Italian knocked out Zverev in 1 hour and 49 minutes. Earlier in the day, Australia's Nick Kyrgios clinched a victory over the 12th ranked Daniil Medvedev by 6-3, 3-6 and 6-3. The Australian produced a wide array of unplayable shots on his way to sealing the victory in 92 minutes. The Italian Open is scheduled to end on Sunday.
And now a look at the weather around the world. That's all for now. Don't forget you can visit our website for details on all of our main stories. You'll find them on indus.news, or you can also choose to keep us on your timeline by following us on social media. Look us up with indus.news.